Bond from Mantle Group, Vincent Gramoli, Red Belly Network, Prashant Gami, Ex-Enabler, and Andrew Zhu from Metaverse Continuum Business Group and Accenture. So welcome everyone, looking forward to your panel.
Awesome, thank you so much. I'd like to start with an acknowledgement of country, to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians of the land, and pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. Hi everyone, my name is Zinilka. As I said, work for the UN, UNICEF. We protect the lives of children in 190 countries. You're probably wondering, what is the UN doing at a blockchain week conference? Well, in fact, what we believe as an organisation is we must understand the technology and we must use it in order to protect the future generations. So we're doing things like we have our crypto wallet, we invest in youth-led startups within the blockchain space, we've launched an NFT drop-in, etc. Topic today on Web2, Web3, contributing to the betterment of the planet is a big one, it's an important one. And we've got some great panelists here today to help us unpack that. Andrew Chu is the Metaverse Continuum Business Strategy Lead at Accenture. His team is experienced across 19 different industries, leading interesting projects such as the ID 2020 for refugees, and more recently, tokenized carbon credit marketplace in Japan. Brad Bond is the head of emerging technologies for Mantle Group. For 2 decades, he's worked as a startup founder and a consultant and has a real passion for emerging technologies, specifically in AI and blockchain. Prashant Gami is the CEO and founder of Ex-Enabler. I love you the way you described yourself. An OG in mobile and blockchain development. He's leading innovation projects that allows people to instantly gamify their community, work with tokenization and AI. And Vincent Gramoli, the founder and CTO of Red Belly Networks, also future fellow at the University of Sydney. Vincent is the author of Future of Blockchain Consensus, published 3 days ago in the flagship journal Communications at the ACM. And thank you so much, guys, for joining us today. There was a great comment earlier on from a panel that said, the blockchain community is a real community. It invites people in, it shows up for each other, even when there's a bear market, and it's a testament to all the seats that are filled today. So can blockchain and Web3 show up and be a force for good for the planet? Can it show up and be a force for good for people? There's research that shows that now more than ever, consumers expect organizations to help bring about sustainable change. So whether you subscribe to ESG's, environmental, social governance, or the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, helping the planet is important to your customers and your staff and stakeholders. So let's jump in on the macro level. How can Web3 save the planet? I'll throw to you, Andrew. I'd love to start with your work at Accenture. What role do you think Web3 can play in the betterment of the planet, especially in your work? And some people tend to believe that the metaverse could also be a distraction from the planetary problems rather than be a solution. I'd love to hear your take on this.
Yeah, so in Accenture, metaverse is always being treated as a continuum. It is a combination of internet place and internet ownership. And Web3 is a core part of internet ownership. And we sort of try to segregate the entry point that we try when we assess the opportunities when it comes to metaverse and Web3. So we have customer metaverse and industry metaverse and enterprise metaverse. And I think, obviously we can go on and on today, but I'd like to sort of focus on the customer part, talk about the impact that we can have in the Web3 part. Because research shows there is a $9 trillion to be inherited by the Gen Xers. And there's a lot of incentive for institutes to think about, okay, how might we think about this new relationship between me and my customers? How can we enable them to directly talking to us or directly talking to each other to reduce bias and to increase transparencies? So I think there's a lot of value opportunities to be unlocked when it comes to Web3. And we've seen a lot of opportunities around identities and on the customer side of providing loyalty and rewards to the customers. And institute side, there's a lot of similar things around identities inside the institute and how they operate to increase the efficiency. So yeah, so if it comes to this sort of opportunities around customer, I think that's a really good use cases we can talk about today.
I'd like you to expand a little bit more on the projects that you're doing in the ID 2020 for refugees.
Yeah.
And the tokenized carbon credit marketplace in Japan. So how does Web3 help in terms of these specific projects?
Sure. So the firm is tech agnostic, and when it comes to the ID 2020 project, it was back in 2019, and there was use cases where the refugee come in without a passport, and they cannot have any physical documents to identify themselves. So we sort of use the biometric fingerprints and scans to tokenize that into the system, so they can go anywhere with their fingerprints as their identity. That was the sort of a core, and that's from the United Nations, and that's the core sort of value points that when we do ID 2020. And for the voluntary carbon credit marketplace in Japan, that was with an organization where they think, how can I utilize it, how can I become a facilitator for the voluntary carbon credit. So for anybody who is not familiar with that, is if you don't have any sort of operations to reduce your carbon emission, you can actually purchase this credit from the people who are doing like trade plans or green activities as a sort of token format. So they created such a marketplace, and we help them to implement that in Japan to facilitate that in market.
Interesting, thank you. And Vincent, I'd love to get your take on this question. You work for a university, you're educating the next generation, and then obviously the work that you're doing with Red Belly Networks. How do you think Web3 can save the planet?
So I'd like to take this question through a technical lens, because I'm a tech person. I think there's a lot of potential around Web3, and in particular its decentralization. And because nowadays we know that the planet is ruled by algorithms, right? Whether we like it or not, if we're looking for a direction and we're using an algorithm, if we're trying to just reading our news in the morning, and these news pieces of information have been ordered by an algorithm. So, and what is interesting about all these algorithms right now, because it's the beginning of Web3, right? We're in this Web2 centralized environment where all these algorithms will typically be extremely opaque, right? And I think one of the things that Web3 can do for the planet is make this algorithm transparent. And by that I mean the following: if you're a taxi driver, for example, Uber driver, and you want to know whether the algorithm that provides you with customers is providing you the closest customers to you, that's a big benefit for your day-to-day life. If you're a user and you can make sure that the information that you're consuming is not misinformation, for example, that's also a big bonus, right? And for example, if we talk about ChatGPT, because that's been mentioned quite a few times already, I don't know if anybody in this room knows the pre-prompt of ChatGPT, the way it was configured, right? So that's a bit scary because we're using these algorithms, they're ruling our lives, but on the other hand, we don't know how they work. And I think what Web3 can do is really bring transparency, which means that now users who will be using these algorithms can do that in a transparent fashion. And if you have domain experts who would say that scrutinize an algorithm and say this is not appropriate because it's not fair as an algorithm, for example, then the users at the end will start ignoring this application and maybe go and use a competitor application, because Web3 is all about transparency.
Thank you for that. Prashant, we had a really interesting conversation in the lead up to the panel. The benefits of Web3 in terms of humanitarian aid and social services such as healthcare. What do you see are the key benefits of Web3 over Web2 for organizations or individuals? I mean, can Web3 bring the price of bread and milk down, for example?
Yeah, so when it comes to Web3 compared to Web2, I think the key word that we've been hearing all day is collaboration, transparency, and security. So when you put something, take it from the Web2 world, which is one person owned and then closed book, you open it up to all the stakeholders, which includes your customers, your suppliers, your ecosystem, and everyone, and you allow them to collaborate into it. Last year in AFR, when people were talking about what is the key outcome of finance, they were saying it makes the data an investable asset. So what does that mean is that you own the data, you can see the data transparently, and that allows the system to actually be more transparent, more collaborative, and users to actually participate not only in the benefit of receiving the service, but how those services are managed, created, and operated. The other key benefit that you see, like you said, can it bring the price of milk and bread down? So when we look at financial system, we see our banks work, especially in the first world country. We don't doubt our credit card. We use it everywhere. In fact, if we see people here, most of us not carrying much cash in the pocket because we trust in the system. Now that trust is provided by the institution and by the third-party providers. Now with Web3, we are building that into the system. So it gives you two benefits. One, the trust is transparent and everybody can collaborate on that. But the second benefit is automation that it does and the self-executing smart contract nature. It brings the cost down of the transaction. So right now, when I transfer $1 from me to Vincent, it takes about 12 cents to actually do that because there's so many risk management system insurances that goes behind it. That can bring down by the automation, and that can really bring the economy in a different way.
Interesting. Brad, I'd love to get your take on the question.
Yeah, I think that one of the really killer applications for individuals using blockchain technology and other newer technologies is around decentralized identity. I think a great sort of use case is the 100-point ID check, for example. We've seen recently around all the hacks that have happened, whether it's Optus or Medibank or others, and these organisations are trusted with so much of our identity information, and they're required to store it for X number of years, etc. And that provides a really big surface area where people can compromise your identity. And through blockchain and zero-knowledge proofs and other new technologies, decentralized identifiers, we can actually take ownership of our own identity information and then control who gets access to that, and also prove our identity without handing over all of that critical information that can then be leaked through hacks. So I'm really excited about that, and I think not only does it help in a westernized country, but it also globally where people have difficulty proving their identity. I think that there's a huge use case in the third world as well.
Thank you. Just switching gears for a minute, with all the benefits that we're hearing, major risks and problems. I'd love to know a little bit more about that. Caroline from Binance Australia mentioned that humans is one of the biggest risks, not necessarily the technology. Vince, I'd love to kind of get your take on what are the biggest risks people on the planet.
Yeah, I think I understand that humans can be the biggest risk because of the security aspect of the system, right? So there is something that is very interesting is Web3 technologies, as we know them today, they are not necessarily making users accountable or responsible for their actions. And that's, I think, a big problem. In a system where you have a blockchain technology, then you might have people trying to steal assets from other people, right? And it's often the case that this blockchain system operates in a censorship-resistant environment where most of the users are anonymous or pseudonymous, right? And I think this produces this lack of accountability, and that's why also at Gramoli Network we have been working for a long time on this notion of accountability that we think is key, because if you lose your assets, if you lose your identity as part of these systems, and someone impersonates you because he had access to your private key, for example, then there is no recourse for this person, to talk to the authorities and try to recover his identity or let alone punish the guilty person, right? So I think what is very important is to introduce this notion of accountability, not at layer 2 or 3 or above, but really within a blockchain system. That's what we've been working on, doing research on the side and implementing this technology as part of Gramoli Network, where we have cryptographic techniques in order to make sure that we can generate proof of fraud. And this is key because we need to have a proper environment with regulation and also people who have a recourse to get back their identity or their assets.
Thank you. Prashant, would you like to add to that?
So I think I want to touch the human aspect that you said, and because we are a blockchain development company primarily, what we see is that a lot of the smart contract, the smart contract are really smart as much as you put them, right? And a lot of these contracts are developed by a lot of amateur programmers, and you find that, okay, a lot of this vulnerability comes from the way it is programmed, not audited, run in production. Like number of blockchain that we saw getting hacked, they were hacked because of the human errors that were put into it. Even like in some cases, private key was just left on a server out in the open, and people just went and took that. So what happens with the risk of the system is we are in a very early days, and these practices and these weights are evolving. They are still getting created. The practices are still getting created. So people are learning, and education is a big part of that. So of course there is risk being an early adopter, that there is no safeguard, there is no regulation, there is no system or knowledge to lean back on, and people need to learn that. But eventually, as the system grows, we get more regulation, we get more safe practices, software practices, auditing in place, and systems that can allow us to deal with these problems that we currently have. And that can get evolving over the time. But the key thing is education. Educating people how to use it, how to not use it, and how to actually build those systems in a way that it, rather than risk, it provides rewards.
And if we're on that point of education and making sure that, all of it's shared around equally, how can that be shared so it's not just high-income countries that get access to education, to learning, to use cases, so that it becomes equitable and fair to the lower-income countries that probably need it most?
That is one thing that I actually like about Web3 community. Like some of our staff is in Nigeria, some of our staff is in Philippines. They're everywhere in the world, right? And it's not just limited. If you see, actually, Nigeria has more active community, Web3 community than Australia. There's no doubt about that. People who are students and all that, they're learning enthusiastically more than the first world countries. Partly for a reason is, when we talk about changing or fixing all these systems, they're broken in those countries more than the first world countries. So we don't really see the need of that. You go to countries where the economy is completely broken, the banks don't work, they are like, this is our savior, this is the technology that's going to change that I can rely upon, and they are more enthusiastic about it. And that's why a lot of the countries that are supporting this, and a lot of the education and the innovation that is coming from those countries, way more than the first world countries. We don't see that yet, but we're going to see that coming more and more in limelight. And education particularly is available to everyone as long as they have internet. So if you see like the way I learned Web3 and blockchain development, I just learned through internet. There was no course, university course or something where I went to. I just went on internet, connected with Discord communities and say, hey, how do I do this? How do I do that? How does this work? And that's how the learning works. And that's again one form of collaboration that we are seeing in Web3 that is unprecedented, and it's very, very strong.
Very interesting. And Vincent, I just want to throw to you, as you're in the education sector, youth, young generation, there's a real need and trend for helping the planet, helping those in need. But in terms of fairness and equity, what are you hearing from students, like you Web3, blockchain students? Are you seeing there a trend for wanting to have purpose that aligns with their values just as much as, launching the technology, for example? Are you seeing anything interesting that you want to share in that space?
This is my question.
Yes.
Yeah, so I teach, I have an online course, so maybe at the time it was not online when you were looking for the information. Yeah. There's this massive open online course that I teach with Coursera University of Sydney, where we have thousands of students coming from various countries. I think there's really a hope that the technology can solve a lot of problems, especially in emerging countries, and I can see that from the type of students that I'm having. It's not clear yet how Web3 can be used in these different contexts. but it's clear that they see the potential. The amount of applications that you can have is just phenomenal. We at Gramoli, we have developed a blockchain that supports decentralized application written in Solidity, just because the ecosystem of decentralized application that exists but it's already written in Solidity is huge. And we have a program where we don't aim at developing this application. It's just coming from the community, and I think it's the best way to proceed. If you want to come up with very useful ideas, then you have to ask the community, maybe the students, the new generation, to try to solve the problems of the future and use the technology just as a playground.
Yeah. Love that idea of kind of co-design, and that's one of the things I'm hearing about the Web3 community is collaboration and co-design, and I love the fact that you're bringing young people into the conversation as well. If you're a Web2 business in the room, and what are the basic steps that you need to do to kind of bridge that gap between Web2 and Web3? Andrew and then Brad after.
So I think there are three flows in this place, and I like to call out because there's a lot of institution leader here in this forum. The first one is actually a mindset shift. Like you have to really think about, what Web3 brings to the company. What's the value of that use case before you actually go in and take advantage of the hype. You need to think about, okay, there's a new form of relationship, and there comes a new form of data, new form of trust, new form of a lot of things. Like just think about, from data perspective, there's a new form of data, so you can have opportunities building your new CDP, and you think about what's the security applied to that when it comes to on-chain, off-chain data, and you have to think about your new architecture. So there's a lot of value that comes in place. And when I take a step back on this value opportunity area, the problem that you're addressing is still how much customer conversion do I have, and how much operational efficiency do I increase, and what's the sort of training engagement do I have inside my enterprise. So these are all your board agenda, to be honest. So there are value, and you can think about these use cases that you can apply Web3 on. And secondly is technology huddle, and there are some tech choices in the market. You really have to make sure the tech choices that you make please the core is sort of the foundation and the digital core foundation for your organization, where you can build all these fantastic use cases on top of it. And the last one is regulation, right? Because this is a new landscape. Normally Web3 is going to be cross-border. There's going to be new accounting, tax, local regulations, privacy rules. You have to all consider. So that's a whole new domain you have to think ahead when the market actually moves already ahead of you. So I'm trying to sort of call out that we need to take actions now, and instead of wait and see.
Thank you. And Brad, that?
Yeah, I think you've got to look at what's in it for the user, your end users, and it's very tempting to say, oh, let's get into the Web3 space, let's create this new application or whatever. But if there's nothing in it for the user, then they're not going to jump on board and get into it, especially when there's usually a little bit of friction up front, whether it's KYC or some other element of onboarding that is possibly more painful than just using a normal Web2 application. So there's got to be something really compelling that gets you over the edge. We've heard from Robbie before from Mutable around digital assets and how gaming assets, and how once people experience owning those assets and then they go back to a centralized game where they don't own those assets, they feel sick, I think was his analogy. You've got to have something compelling enough where once the users start using it, they really get it, and also think about how you can obfuscate the fact that it is even blockchain or Web3, that it's so simple to onboard and to get value out of it, that the technology behind it isn't the key part we're talking about. There's a great application, it's been out for over a year now, but they got huge traction. It's called Sweatcoin, just because it was so simple to onboard, and you basically get rewarded with coins for based on your sort of Apple Health metrics, etc. So things like that, where we can onboard. I think they onboarded 10 million users in a handful of weeks, and just getting it to the point where it's not all talking about crypto and wallets and blockchain and everything. It's more just, hey, this is a great new feature that we have. You might have to jump through a couple of little hoops to get it, but once you've experienced it, you won't want to go back.
Thank you. We've got a couple more minutes, so I just want to close with a question that each of you can have a go at answering. If we think about betterment of the planet in the future, and there's no costs and there's no challenges, what's one issue globally that you would hope that Web3 could solve? I'll throw it up. And Andrew?
Everybody heard about WorldCoin? So there's a very fun, they're trying to resolve the poverty, right? So using decentralized technologies to give people money and to provide the resource to the people that actually want it. Because if you look at the whole planet, the demand on resources is actually way lower than what we can produce. Web3 can address that. So Sam Altman is looking at that as well. If you're interested, search it up. That's my take to resolve poverty.
Right, thank you, Michelle.
One thing that the reason financial sector was the first one to jump on this technology was double spend, and that was the original algorithm that stopped double spend. So I think if it can control inflation, or at least to the level where people don't have to worry about, oh, my money is gonna not have as much value in the future, that would be amazing. Then we don't have to worry about, okay, what's gonna happen.
We have talked about all the advantages of Web3, so I guess there's kind of consensus already. So how do we make Web3 work? I think we just have to port the Web2 application to Web3 platforms. How do we do that? I think the performance that the blockchain can support is not there yet. We've done some tests with the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology. We have a paper this year where we tested Algorand and Avalanche EM. Which are among the most modern blockchains, and we tested, real applications like shared economy application, Uber application, NASDAQ for exchanges, and none of them could commit all the transactions. I think the goal is to make sure that these platforms are mature enough, and this is what we're working on at Gramoli to support this very realistic workloads that we have from the to make sure we can replace it.
And Brad, final thoughts?
I'm really excited about how blockchain and Web3 technologies can help in the AI space. We're going through this huge revolution in AI, and it's moving so rapidly that we can't keep up, and we're all nervous about where it's headed. And AI alignment, or alignment of large language models to our morals and values, is something that's completely up in the air at the moment. We're leaving it up to large organisations to determine this. And I think that we can use the decentralised nature of blockchain to allow huge communities around the world to come together and vote and help direct alignment, and having some sort of common guardrails and standards that we implement. And I think that that would be a really awesome use case.
Wonderful. Thank you guys. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks very much to that panel for sharing some of the non-financial aspects that Web3 and blockchain are going to be able to help with. And just remember, it's the internet of value. It's this peer-to-peer transmission of value that's going to enable so much to happen, whether it's humanitarian, identity, climate,